Welcome, everybody. It is the Tuesday edition of Talkback, brought to you by Missoula Nissan Hyundai. Drive what you want affordably. Stop by Missoula Nissan Hyundai. Find out how leasing may be your best deal on a new car located on Brooks next to Southgate Mall. Dig It Excavating, bringing 30 years of excellence to every job. Call 214-4292. Kootenai Creek Village, the maintenance-free active adult community in Stevensville, offering the best of Western Montana living. Call 777-5387. Herbert and Gerbert's Sandwich Shop, now open on Higgins, next to the Big Dipper. And NC Design Studios, specializing in high-end residential architecture and commercial development. Also brought to you by the Mustard Seed Restaurant in Southgate Mall. All right, here we are. It's Tuesday. We were expecting a special guest in studio for one reason or another. It could be the smoke. People get lost in the smoke. We just don't know sometimes. Anyway, so good morning, Mr. John King.
Hey, good morning, Peter. I have an important question for you this morning.
Yes, and the answer is Bleem.
Bleem.
Yes.
I knew it had to be Bleem. Okay, so I'm a little concerned about our city.
Okay.
I don't want to have successful criminals in my town. But it seems like we have some of the dumbest criminals in America in Missoula as of late.
I know. You know, it's the smoke, John. It confuses people.
Some of this was happening before the smoke.
All right.
I know, because you were on vacation, and I was looking out the window every morning.
Right.
Why the kid locked himself in the back of the trunk he was trying to steal. But I just got to know. So the other day, this kid busts into the Holiday on Russell Street.
Right.
I say kid. He's probably 20. He busts into the Holiday with a kitchen knife, commits a felony, armed robbery, for a pack of something I would give away if it was in my fridge. For Bud Light.
But no, what's wrong with Bud Light?
It's horrible. Now, that's because you've only tried bad beer. You think Bud Light is okay.
I'm not a drinker. I don't like beer at all.
Well, you could try Bud Light and still not drink beer.
I'm sure the bottlers of Bud Light would be happy to do that.
There's a slim difference between human urine and Bud Light.
Wow.
Sorry. There's actually tests for this. It's very close. It doesn't pass the U test.
So now I understand the gentleman came, but you got to remember, you have to take into account what time it happened, about 4 a.m, okay?
No, it was 11. It wasn't like crazy. It was like in the evening.
No, it was, according to Travis, like 3 in the morning.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I'm getting the other stupid issue. Yeah. The guy that gets pulled over, hands his ID over to the police officer, and then drives away.
Right. Yeah. So here's how it works. He gets pulled over. The officer comes up and can I have your driver's license and registration and proof of insurance? Sure, officer. Here, take him. He goes back, sits in his car, and all of a sudden, car's gone. I wonder if there's some kind of medical emergency going on here. No, he just took off. And so he went on a high-speed chase on the interstate.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, according to your well-written story, he went so fast that the pursuing officer said, you know what, this is causing a safety hazard. I think we'll probably be able to find the guy. Because why?
He left his ID at the scene of the crime.
And should I give his name?
Sure, why not? Well, and I got to give this kid a little bit of praise. He turned himself in.
Yes, he did.
And that is not – so I won't even put him in my poll. I would like to do a on-the-spot poll. Who do you think has the lower IQ? The guy that locks himself in the trunk of the vehicle he's trying to steal and has to call 911 to help get him out and then claims that he accidentally fell in. Or the guy that commits a felony for Bud Light.
And with a kitchen knife.
With a kitchen knife.
Yes. Yeah. So it was Colonel Mustard in the convenience store with the kitchen knife.
Or the Bud Light.
Yeah, for the Bud Light. Okay, lines are open. This is a serious question, and I'm wondering: is it our public school system, John? Is it the fact that these kids were all graduates of public school, and so they don't really understand? First of all, they don't understand. Obviously, in public school, they don't teach about good beer. They probably don't understand. Train you in the ability to be able to discern between good beer and bad beer.
Yes.
And also, in public school, they probably don't teach you the correct way to break into a vehicle without locking yourself in the trunk. So I'm just wondering if is it our school system that is to blame here?
Well, I don't think there is a car entry 101 class in any
not
in
even
any school.
not even in the Missoula College or the Votech or anything like that. Nothing. Okay, I'm just funning with you, educational professionals.
I have
relax.
I do have an opinion on this.
Okay, go ahead.
I would let my daughter date the guy that locked himself in the trunk about 10 years before the guy that did the Bud Light robbery.
Why? It's just beer. Beer is beer, John.
Well, first of all right, there's certain expectations, right? What are you going to get out of this crime? Okay?
yeah, right.
Okay, one guy, you win a brand new car. You win something someone would throw away. There's a big margin of difference there.
So the risk reward factor is not going very well here, right?
Also, there's the punishment factor.
Oh yeah,
Right?
When
Let's say worst case scenario, you get caught because there's video cameras all over Holiday in full color of you walking in. That's for the knife guy.
Hi.
If you get caught,
Hi, Mom. Yeah,
if you get caught, felony
it's a theft. Felony theft.
Armed robbery, actually.
Do you know what the penalty is for armed robbery? Seriously, it is a maximum of 20 years in prison and a $10,000 fine for a 30-pack of Bud Light.
It's not even 30. Don't overstate it.
Oh, wasn't it really?
It's only 24.
Oh, a 24-pack. Well, I don't know what to tell you.
And then the other guy,
Wow.
I don't even think he has felony charges. He
No,
got misdemeanor
It's
charges.
a misdemeanor charge, yeah, because
Misdemeanor fell into trunk.
I'm not sure where that is in the statute. I'm looking under the code annotated for locking yourself in the trunk of a car you were trying to steal. That doesn't quite make it as far as the legal minimums there. So
we
anyway.
obviously need better legislation to deal with the
Perhaps
inane crimes in Missoula.
Now hold on. Let's look for a little bit of opportunity here. I think a couple of things perhaps a niche opportunity for someone to say, okay, if you're willing to use a steak knife, a kitchen knife to steal bad beer, why don't we have a beer appreciation course for thieves so that they can, if they're going to steal beer, you can learn which beer is good enough to steal and actually, take the risk of going to prison for 10 years.
I know there's not a beer worth going to prison for.
Anyway.
But there's some that are much closer. There's some I would spend a night in the doghouse for,
And
baby.
remember the ancient adage, you don't buy beer, you just rent it. Anyway, we're going to take a little break. Says 721-1290, 1-800-568-5309.
Speaking of you're in or you're out, looks like Joe Biden might be joining the race. So we'll talk about what Josh Earnest said surprised a lot of pundits this week. We'll get back to that after the break.
Stay with us. We're coming right back. We're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. That's John King over there. I'm Peter Christian, and nobody was biting on the bad beer there, John. Sorry.
Oh, that's good. At least everyone can agree with me then. I'll rest in that. I'm surprised I didn't get any hate mail from a Bud Light supporter. Luckily, our great breweries locally have, I think, eschewed any desire for Bud Light from the system of Missoula.
Okay. Again, I'm a total bystander here because I don't drink any of it, so I wouldn't know the difference between one or the other. So anyway, so go ahead.
All right. So this is the clip I wanted to play. This is Josh Earnest,
right?
And he's the president's spokesperson, basically. When the president's not talking, Josh Earnest is.
Okay.
And he's dropped a few interesting tidbits over the past month and a half. One of which we'll probably talk about in the next hour. He suggested that the Iranian nuclear sanctions deal would be good for America because it would give us more military options, which is basically contrary, it seems to me, to this deal or war, this deal for war.
Doesn't it give them more military options?
Maybe. The argument being that we'll have an idea of where all of their production change for their nuclear
Gotcha.
System would be.
Okay.
Anyway, this is another thing he said interesting, throwing a bomb into the presidential bid for Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And basically flat out is asked a question that concerns Hillary Clinton and doesn't back down. Basically says, Joe Biden, big arrow, better than Hillary Clinton.
All right.
And here's what it sounded like.
Now remember, folks, Hillary Clinton is the presumed nominee for the Democratic nomination.
And killing it.
There's no question.
Yeah, she's winning in polls and everything. So to hear something like this from the president's spokesperson against the nominee who is currently winning is a bit of a shocker.
So here we go. This is Josh Earnest.
So we had the development over the weekend that the vice president came back and met with Elizabeth Warren. How would the president deal with this if Biden actually decides to run? Here you have his current vice president against his former Secretary of State.
Yeah. Well, there's not an insignificant if in that question. And I think that's what everybody is pretty interested to find out, is what decision the vice president is going to make. The president has indicated his view that the decision that he made, I guess 7 years ago now, to add Joe Biden to the ticket as his running mate was the smartest decision that he had ever made in politics. And I think that should give you some sense of the president's view of Vice President Biden's aptitude for the top job.
So I assume that means the president would support Vice President Biden if he were to run. I mean, this is obviously a better decision than the Secretary of State he chose. So, are you suggesting? You said it was the best decision he'd made. So.
Yeah, it was. And I think what the president has spoke at quite some length about the appreciation, respect, and admiration he has for the service of Secretary Clinton, particularly in her 4 years as Secretary of State.
Just not his best decision.
Well, again, I think all of you and your coverage of some of the president's comments about Secretary Clinton have noted how warm those comments were. I'll just say that the vice president is somebody who has already run for president twice. He's been on a national ticket through 2 election cycles now, both in 2008 and in the re-election of 2012. And so I think you could make the case that there is probably no one in American politics today who has a better understanding of exactly what is required to mount a successful national presidential campaign. And that means that he's going to collect all the information that he needs to make a decision. He's indicated that he would make a decision and announce a decision before the end of the summer. So those of us who enjoy the summertime, I think,
about 10 minutes,
would assume that means he's got another month or so here to think about this and announce a decision.
But the last thing, will the president remain neutral, or I mean, we used to say right now that the president will or will not endorse somebody before the primary is over?
Well, I've been asked this once before, and I have indicated that the president does plan to vote in the Illinois primary, and that ultimately it will be Democratic voters who are responsible for choosing the Democratic nominee. But I wouldn't speculate at this point about whether or not the president would offer an endorsement in the Democratic primary.
Possibility he could say endorse Joe Biden or endorse Hillary Clinton.
I wouldn't rule out. I wouldn't rule out an endorsement or Bernie Sanders. I wouldn't rule out the possibility of an endorsement in the Democratic primary. I am confident the president will support the Democratic nominee in the general election. Okay, Major.
Okay, there you go. So that's what's going on.
This is great. Well, I think it's great.
There's a lot of non-denial denials in there.
It's great for both Democrats and Republicans, I think. First of all, it's great for Democrats because then they'll actually get to hear some of the policies that the various candidates have on a national forum, perhaps, because Joe Biden is not going to let it slide that we don't have debates.
Okay,
for the longest time.
Let's get Catherine on the line. Catherine, what's up, kid?
Well, let's see. A couple of questions here. What is Joe Biden's age?
72.
72. He also had a brain aneurysm at one point, I believe.
That could be, yeah. He may have some health issues, absolutely.
Yes, and he also has a propensity for blurting out whatever he wants at any given time.
Well, yeah, he pales in comparison to Donald Trump.
That's right.
Speaking of blurting things out.
That's why many people see him as the best foil if Donald Trump is to win the nomination.
If it's Biden versus Trump, they may as well put it in a steel cage match with folding chairs and WWF.
Well, that certainly would be interesting. Of course, Hillary Clinton has some health issues too. Apparently, from what I understand, she had a minor stroke at one point.
That's what correct? It sounded like, and that wasn't too long ago, like a year and a half ago or so.
Right. So we've got.
No, she's 67, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but her health isn't the greatest. So I don't know.
And Donald Trump is what?
69.
You guys want the actual breakdown?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Looking at the age of possible 2016 candidates, the oldest, far and away. Well, not far and away. It's really close, actually. Bernie Sanders would be 75.4.
Okay.
Joe Biden would be 74.2.
Wow.
Years old. Jim Webb would be 71. Hillary would be 69. Young duckling in the race here. Elizabeth Warren would be 67. And then Martin O'Malley fills out the bottom bracket in the age group with 54. The oldest person running on the Republicans, who's not even running, would be Mitt Romney at 69. He's the old white guy. Right. He's 69. He's younger than all but one of the candidates for the left. I'm sorry, all but two. And then Rick Perry, who actually is running, the oldest person running on the Republican ticket, Rick Perry at 66. Younger than everybody on the Democratic ticket except for Martin O'Malley.
How old is Trump?
Donald Trump.
I thought he was 69.
I thought he was too.
You know what? This particular age bracket was made before Donald Trump was a serious contender.
All right, gotcha.
Which still hasn't happened, in my opinion.
Yeah, we all know, John, just how much esteem you hold Mr. Trump in.
I think John's in denial. I really do.
I think he is great at grabbing television cameras. I think he has horrible policies for America and is a dangerous person for the Republican Party.
I don't think so.
Really? You like raising tariffs? You free market libertarian, you?
I don't think we're going to end up raising tariffs.
That's what he's wanting. That's the only major policy he's promoted except for his immigration plan, which revolves around revoking the 14th Amendment.
It doesn't revoke the 14th Amendment.
Okay, you think getting into the anchor baby discussion, which I think it's a bad term, but you think that is a good thing for the party?
Sure, why not?
How does it sound? We want to be the country that if you are born here, not of your own will, if you're born here, we're not going to take care of you. We're not going to let you have citizenship.
Take care of anybody? Why
it's your
take care of anybody?
We do it of all of our children.
Well, individuals do it with their individual children.
But we're not treating these babies like individuals. We're holding them responsible for their parents' mistakes.
Hold on just a second. Let's forget for just a second about the fact of their age. The fact that they're born in this country makes them United States citizens. Does it not?
Let's
play this.
Tell you what.
It depends on your interpretation of the 14th Amendment.
Okay, hold on. We're up against a break, so I got to play these commercials. We'll come back and we'll talk about this. John's also on the line.
And I have Ted Cruz to explain the 14th Amendment for us.
Stand by. He's a constitutional scholar.
Right.
Yeah, he's debated before the Supreme Court.
I've heard that.
We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. We have about exactly 2 minutes. So you said you wanted to listen to something.
Yeah. Ted Cruz is a big Trump supporter. Right. They've been working together. Their campaigns have. Here's Ted Cruz, circa 2011, running for Senate.
Here we go.
I have spent my professional career defending the Constitution. I served 5.5 years as the Solicitor General of Texas, the chief lawyer for the state of Texas in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, and I've repeatedly defended the Constitution. The 14th Amendment provides for birthright citizenship. I've looked at the legal arguments against it, and I will tell you, as a Supreme Court litigator, those arguments are not very good. As much as someone may dislike the policy of birthright citizenship, it's in the U.S. Constitution. And I don't like it when federal judges set aside the Constitution because their policy preferences are different. And so my view, I think it's a mistake for conservatives to be focusing on trying to fight what the Constitution says on birthright citizenship. I think we are far better off focusing on securing the border because birthright citizenship wouldn't be an issue if we didn't have people coming in illegally. The way to prevent that is to secure the border now so that people are not coming in.
All right,
Okay, there you go. All right, so we have less than a minute. So, Catherine, real quickly, I'll give you 30
I didn't
seconds.
hear any of that.
Oh, I'm
There
sorry.
was-
Sorry.
Basically, he reiterated what I think.
Yeah,
That it's a bad argument to get trapped into. It doesn't do good, and it's against the U.S. Constitution.
I disagree. I disagree. I disagree.
Okay,
All right.
gotcha. Hey,
Okay.
we will do an open phones on this, okay? Yeah.
And we'll have our constitutional scholar, Rob Nadelson, will be on
Nadelson,
the 4th, and I'll ask him. I haven't talked to him. I have no idea what he thinks about this.
I think that's a great topic.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's right.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that.
Ted Cruz changes his opinion from time to time, just like Trump. I have other cuts where he said the opposite thing.
We are, unfortunately, John, we're out of time for your call. I apologize. We have a whole new topic and a whole new guest coming up at 9 o'clock this morning. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson is going to be with us, so you stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome, everybody. It's hour number 2 of Talkback. Already a scintillating discussion. We're going to shift gears and go another direction right now. But first, I need to tell you that Talkback is brought to you by the Mustard Seed Restaurant, NC Design Studio, Herbert and Gerbert's Sandwich Shop, Kootenai Creek Village, Daggett Excavating, Missoula Nissan Hyundai. All right, we're back. John King over there. I'm Peter Christian. We have a special guest on the phone, John.
That's right. Well, we're blessed to have Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson with us today. He likes to fly fish in Montana, as I understand it. He also has a little bit more to his name. That's why he's a guest on the show today. He's was Secretary of State Colin Powell's Chief of Staff between 2002 and 2005, Associate Director for the State Department's Policy Planning Staff under the directorship of Ambassador Richard Haas, and member of the staff responsible for East Asia and Pacific political, military, and legislative affairs between 2001 and 2002. Before serving at the State Department, Wilkerson served 31 years in the U.S. Army. During that time, he was a member of the faculty of the U.S. Naval War College between 87 and 89, special assistant to General Powell when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that was between 89 and 93, and director and deputy director of the U.S. Marine Corps War College at Quantico, Virginia between 93 and 97. I also understand, having read one of his most recent pieces, he helped to design the potential battle plan if the Soviets were to roll out of Afghanistan down through Iran. So he has intimate knowledge of what it would take to deal with violence on the Iranian turf, which probably led to his piece, which you can read as well. I posted it on our Facebook page, and I do advise that you read it. It'll give you a lot of insight into the conversation today. It's called The Isolated States of America. And in this piece, Mr. Wilkerson promotes the current nuclear/sanctions agreement between the P5+1 countries, P5 and Iran. So welcome to the show, Mr. Wilkerson. I'm very, very, very expectant to hear your case for this because I am one of these people, like most Americans, kind of on the fence, but I lean against the deal. So welcome to the program.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be in Montana, if only on the waves.
Hey, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us a little bit about your view of Iran as from 30,000 feet, if you will, from right now. We just hear so much. We've had people here on our program, on the Talkback program, who are actually Persian, who say that the people of Iran are very friendly. They want to get involved with the West. They want to have more dealings with the rest of the world, while the power structure, the mullahs, the religious power structure, are aging and probably won't be around for a terribly long time. And so the advice we got from that gentleman was be patient. It'll all get better if we just wait long enough. But there are others who say, we can't wait. I mean, Iran is working on a nuclear bomb. We have to do something. So would you tell us what your view is right now of Iran?
I'm the last person to preach about U.S. intelligence assets, or for that matter, France's, Germany's, Britain's, Israel's, or anybody else's, because as your listeners may recall, I'm the one who helped Colin Powell prepare the UN presentation for 5 February 2003, wherein we said Iraq still had weapons of mass destruction, which we all know now was a false case. That said, I've seen all the intelligence. I've read the intelligence. I know that the intelligence was developed partly because the intelligence community had been so wrong about WMD in Iraq, and so they really, really tried to get it right this time. And their conclusion in their October 2002 National Intelligence Estimate across the board, and this is all the other countries I mentioned, plus more, plus the United States, is that Iran has not made a decision to build a nuclear weapon. That's their considered and strong view. It makes sense, too, from the perspective of my own as a strategist dealing with Iran since 1984, and as a person who teaches the history of U.S. and Iran relations all the way back to prior to World War II. It makes sense because Iran would only have dallied with making a nuclear weapon because Saddam Hussein was doing the same, Saddam Hussein being their principal number one enemy in the region. And so once Saddam Hussein was taken out, I could see a decision that would be something like this. Okay, they know we were working on one at one time. Let's see what we can get out of that. And so then we got the negotiations. I would hasten to add also that not dealing with Iran for the 8 years of the Bush administration essentially moved us from Iran's having about 200 centrifuges for enriching uranium in 2001 to about 8,000 in 2008. And then as we tried to put a sanctions regime together under the new Democratic administration, before we could do that and make those sanctions bite, they had 19,000 centrifuges. So clearly not talking to Iran, not speaking to evil, as Dick Cheney couched it, was not the right policy.
Let me ask you this. So your take and the take of most of the intelligence agencies that have looked at this is that ramp up in growth from the centrifuges that you just described, that was merely some sort of brinksmanship to try to get a deal made?
That's the way I look at it. And remember, I've been dealing with Iran since the beginning, at least historically till 1984, and then as one of the Army's principal strategists and planners from 1984 forward. Remember that in 1984, we were buried literally in the middle of one of the most brutal wars the world had seen since World War II. Clearly, for the region, it was the most brutal war in a century, and that was the Iran-Iraq War. Hundreds of thousands of men in mass wave attacks against chemical weapons used by Iraq. We were on both sides. We were providing intelligence to the Iraqis on Iranian formations, and we were providing Hawk missiles and TOW missiles to the Iranians. The theory at the time was we'd keep providing support to both sides until they wiped each other out. We had a joke in the military. It was something like this: let's keep doing this until there's one Iranian left and one Iraqi left, and then we'll issue them dueling pistols.
Wow.
That was sort of our philosophy, as cold as it might seem.
Tell you what, Colonel Wilkerson, we're up against a commercial break here. We'll do that about every 10 minutes or so. This is already getting very interesting. And so if you don't mind, would you mind if we open the phone lines and take some calls for you?
Surely.
All right, so we're going to take a little break. 721-1290 is our number. 1-800-568-5309. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, we've already heard a little bit of his background and the fact that he's been there and done that, quite literally. So we're going to come right back with more of Talk Back right after this. And we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson is joining us. He's talking to us from his home in Virginia, and we are continuing our discussion about the deal that the countries have put together with Iran. There's quite a bit of opposition, especially among conservatives, especially a lot of the presidential debates revolved around the treaty. And so we're talking to a gentleman who has quite literally been there, done that since the beginning, and is in favor of the current.
He's in favor of the current deal, the negotiation. Yeah. Now, Mr. Wilkerson, I wanted to give you some of the issues that I have with the.
Sure.
And one of the things that I have a difficulty with is the particular issue of the negotiations. Before the negotiations were released last month, we had some framework released, some of the guiding principles of what the negotiations would be. And what came out seemed to be quite a bit different. And some of the things that were added, and we keep hearing about as the days roll on, seem like we made not a very good deal. And one of those things seems to be a contrary argument to what you were presenting a second ago. The idea that Iran was just developing this nuclear or making it look like they had a nuclear ambition in order to get a deal. And my question for you is, if that's all they wanted, it should have been easier for them to sign a deal that would have prohibited nuclear weapons in the future. But they didn't sign that deal. They're just delaying it for 15 years. Why wasn't that a focus if nuclear arms being off the table was an intent from the P5+1 countries? Why wasn't that a focus of the deal and part of the arrangement?
Well, diplomacy is what you can get, and both sides have positions as they go in. Once you get going, then those positions become malleable if the negotiations are going to succeed, and you can move around, so to speak, amongst the main points on each side. Frankly, I take a totally different perspective on this agreement. I am stunned, knowing the Iranians the way I know the Iranians, and knowing what good bazaris they are, for example, bargaining in the bazaar for this or that.
Right.
I'm stunned we got what we got. It is amazing to me that they are allowing this unprecedented intrusion on their facilities, not just the nuclear facilities, which will have the most rigorous inspection regime imposed on them in the history of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but also other facilities that might be subject to someone's scrutiny. And this business of Jerry Nadler, the Jewish-American Democrat from New York, just came out with an eloquent statement refuting almost everything Chuck Schumer said on the other side of the proposition. And his exquisite defeat of this business of there not being intrusive inspections and the so-called 24-day window and all this is just beautiful. I recommend it to everyone. It's online, Jerry Nadler. But this is the most intrusive inspection regime I've ever seen, and I'm amazed. For example, we can even go look at their military sites. Turn that around for a moment. Do you think for a moment that the United States, under the most possible duress you can conceive even, would allow people to go on their military sites, take photographs, inspect, and so forth?
Well, during the START II treaties, we had Russians checking out our missile silos.
Oh, yeah, we really did. We had a lot of people going around in very, very, very controlled ways and doing very, very controlled things.
In fact, they were supposed to do an investigation in Montana not too long ago.
Yeah, and look at where we are now in that. So,
well, at least they were Russians checking them out. In this case, at least what the AP said, apparently they got a leak of one of these side agreements. The Iranians would be not only being able to decide who checks their facilities, but in one case taking video and samples of the facility themselves at the Parchin complex.
Yeah, that was some of the disinformation put out by the hard right, funded by Sheldon Adelson and others in this country. It's been completely blown away, particularly blown away by what I consider our man at the IAEA, Yukio Mano.
So
we picked the Japanese nuclear physicist, and he became head of the IAEA. Here again, if I were Iran, I'd be complaining bitterly that Yukio Mano, a U.S. surrogate, if you will, was the head of the IAEA. But they've accepted him, as we had to grudgingly accept Mohammed al-Baradei.
Okay, let's get to the phone and say good morning to Richard. Richard, you're on with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Go ahead.
Colonel Wilkerson, I have heard for years, for past years, that the arguments made were by the Iranians were all surrounded by the idea of developing nuclear reactors to produce steam or heat that could be used to take the salt out of water and use the water for irrigation. Whatever happened to that?
Okay, thanks, Richard.
Well, that's a good question. You know, most Americans don't know that the people who gave Iran its original nuclear program were us, the United States of America. When Iran was under the Shah for 25, 26 years, our tyrant, if you will, they were our surrogate in the Gulf. They looked after our interests in the Gulf. We were even at one point entertaining the idea of giving them a nuclear program that would lead to nuclear weapons. Fortunately, we voted against that, rightfully in my view, just as we did with South Korea when South Korea tried to secretly develop a nuclear weapon in the late 70s. So we're responsible to a certain extent. But yes, their nuclear program was originally designed, and I would submit that it is mostly designed today, to provide for medical isotopes in their hospitals and to do other things with the nuclear power. The other part of this agreement that makes me a little more content, it's not a perfect agreement. No agreement's perfect, and this one's not either, but we have gotten them to agree, and I didn't think this would happen this forthrightly, to eliminate the fastest route to a nuclear weapon, the route, for example, that North Korea took, and that's plutonium. Their plutonium reactor will be recored. A new core will be put in it so that it cannot produce the plutonium that would allow them to take that track to a bomb. So this was an incredible achievement in my view. I didn't think Iraq or potential plutonium-producing facilities in the future would be that closely guarded or that much changed, and yet they are going to be kept from building a weapon that faster route. It's also technically, no route is technically easy, but the plutonium route is easier than the highly enriched uranium route.
Tell you what, Colonel Wilkerson, we're up against another break. Patty is waiting very patiently to visit with you. We also have one line open at 721-1290 or 1-800-568-5309. This is Talkback. Our guest, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, and we'll be right back. This is Talkback. It's Tuesday, August 25th. Thanks for joining us. I'm Peter Christian. That's John King over there. We've got Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson joining us on the phone from, I'm assuming you're in your office or in your home, sir?
I'm sitting in front of my computer finishing my syllabus for William & Mary.
All right, super. Let's get back to the phones and say good morning to Patty. Patty, you're on with Colonel Wilkerson. Go ahead.
Well, I want to thank the station for having on Colonel Wilkerson, for telling the truth. We don't hear this type of rhetoric or truth like we should.
Well, believe it or not, Patty, we do try to get both sides.
This is our third guest in support of the Iranian nuclear deal.
Well, no, I know, but he is telling the truth. In my opinion, we overthrew the elected leader in Iran and put the Shah in power. Other countries are sick of that. They're sick of America pushing their way into their world and demanding. And when the Shah got kicked out by the people, we had our own revolution in America. Iran kicked him out. We brought a lot of Iranians over here and gave them huge amounts of money. I know one not too far from here, right around Missoula, that got a $750,000 loan that they never paid back. So there's so many deals being made behind the scenes. And why should Iran believe America when we lied in Iraq? Don't you remember Valerie Plane's husband? He wouldn't lie and said that those fuselages or whatever they were from Africa, and Bush outed them, gave their names. Do you remember that?
Look, I'm not saying that any of these countries, frankly, have a great track record on holding up to their promises.
No, one of the ones that doesn't have a good track record is America.
Fair enough.
Ahmadinejad wrote Bush a 27-page letter, and Bush didn't even recognize it because they knew they wanted to go into Iran. It's been a long-time plan.
Okay, now, Patty, do you have a question?
I hope we make peace.
Hold on. Do you have a specific question for our guest, Colonel Wilkerson?
Well, I'm just saying, how can Iran trust America after we lied when we went into Iraq?
Okay, let's
remember we sent inspectors in, and then because Valerie Plane's
Patty,
husband,
we're happy to let you talk on another day, but today we're trying to let Colonel Wilkerson talk. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks
Patty, you have a good point. I recently participated in John Tierman and Malcolm Byrne's oral history project at MIT in Massachusetts. We brought Iranians in on one side of the table. We brought Americans from the U.S. government in, former government officials on the other side of the table. And we brought academics in and put them at the ends of the table, academics who knew Iran and U.S. relations very well. And we simply had 3 days of debate. We covered the period 2000 to 2005 and then the period 2005 to 2010. There are arguments on both sides. And one of the things I really fault the United States for constantly is a lack of empathy. Empathy means putting yourself in the other person's shoes and interpreting the world from that perspective. I'm not trying to defend the mullahs in Iran. I'm not trying to defend the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps. I'm trying to say that you need to understand the perspective the other side has in order to negotiate. And you're right, that perspective, if it's balanced, says the United States has been as mistrustful, if you will, as Iran has in the some 50-plus years of our relationship of significance. So you have to consider that when you're negotiating. That said, I don't trust the leadership in Iran. The comments in the beginning were quite good. Most Iranians, and we have to remember there are a lot of soldiers there, about 50 million of them, as a matter of fact, because they're majorly under the age of 35. A huge population of youth and a huge population of young males. And so this is a country that basically feels some affection for the United States, not for Washington, but for the U.S. people, for Americans in general. We've been their friends from World War II forward. So it's not a population that we can't deal with if we get a more trusting, a more, shall we say, a closer, more normal relationship. So I'm very, very hopeful that we'll not only deal with this first component of our problems, the nuclear weapon, but that eventually we'll deal with some other problems like support for terrorism, like ISIS and ISIL in the Syrian civil war. Indeed, there will never be stability in Southwest Asia, in the Middle East, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, without Iran. It's the most stable country in the region. It has 75 million people. It's 4 times the size of the state of Texas. The people have a national cohesion unlike any other in the region because they weren't designed by Britain. They're not fake country, in other words. So we've got to have closer relations with these people, and it's worth the risk with this nuclear agreement, which is as intrusive as any has ever been, to start that process. And here's what I tell my Republican colleagues. Look, this agreement does not obviate any of the other options. What's your alternative to this agreement? And they can't answer my question. Returning to sanctions is a farce. No one will go back to sanctions but us. And so they'll be just as ineffective as they were under George W. Bush. You can't do anything but do nothing or bomb. Those are the only 2 other options.
I will give you another option in a second. But
signing this agreement does not preclude either one of those other options. If the Iranians cheat 9 months down the road, 3 years down the road, you can still bomb.
Hey, tell you what, Colonel, we're up against a break. I'm sorry. Catherine is also on the line. Now, you had a...
I do, and one of the other options that we'll talk about a little bit later. One of the things that I am most troubled by, and I really need to be persuaded to agree with this deal, to think it's a good idea. I think it's going to happen either way, but just for my own personal feelings, how about it? I would like to hear why this deal would be good for the region when it comes to terrorism and when it comes to the issue of control in Iran. I feel like this deal will entrench the current ruling party and make it harder for the people who I do believe actually do want more freedom and more access to America and Western ideals and outside ideals. I feel like this will go contrary to that because it will give money and power to those in control already.
We'll be right back. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, Catherine also on the line, and we do have a line open. It's 721-1290. We'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Talkback. Fascinating discussion with the Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, and he's with us from the state of Virginia, and he has had quite decades of experience in dealing with the folks in Iraq. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was hoping you could relieve me of my biggest fear. I think the most dangerous thing in the region is terrorism from Iran to its neighbors and the entrenched government there, and I feel that this deal further entrenches the government there against the people and against its neighbors. And that the nuclear issue, if it is, as you portrayed, just brinksmanship and not a real threat, why should we consider this deal when I think that it only furthers the real threat, which is activism and terrorism in the region?
It's a good question. It's a question I've wrestled with myself, particularly the one about the government. Does helping Rouhani, who might be called a moderate, does it really help to unseat eventually the truly radical people like the Ayatollah and to meet the wider and more democratic interest of the 75 million Iranians? Or does it just cement the Ayatollah's hold? He'll get rid of Rouhani, he'll get rid of anybody that looks like him, bring back somebody like Ahmadinejad and resume course? That's a good question. I'm willing to take a chance to see if what Colin Powell and I always talked about was the best instrument of change in any country, not our military, but the open flow and international flow of information, economics, finance, and so forth, isn't enough to transform Iran in the long haul. As, for example, I believe, and I've been to Havana a number of times now, it is now transforming Cuba. Powell used to say all you got to do is open up and let the world flow into these countries and their dictatorships will be gone in 3 to 5 years. I think he was right, and I'm willing to take a chance on that. And I think the agreement is good enough to where the chance is worth taking.
Do you believe, now every other advocate for the deal that I've spoken with has agreed with me that this deal will allow more expenditures for terror, basically a hyper amount of funding for groups like Hamas, or Hezbollah, I should say, sorry. Do you feel that there will be an increased amount of terror after this deal when the money flows to Iran?
I can't say whether there'll be any terror or not, because it seems to be a pretty well doing its thing in the world without any significant help from Iran, as well as the ones that get help from Iran, like Hezbollah. But I can say this. It isn't the amount of money that people have been throwing around, especially on the right. It's about $56 billion. It is Iran's money already. And by the way, it is in banks in China, India, South Korea, Japan, and Hong Kong. It is not in the United States, so they're going to get the money anyway, because the other partners in this P5+1/Iran deal are not going to walk away from it. They're going to stay at it, and therefore we're going to be the isolated party. So Iran's going to get this money anyway. Rouhani won promising the Iranian people that he would give them a better economy. Ahmadinejad and the sanctions had driven it into the ground. So if Rouhani is going to be reelected, and if Rouhani is going to maintain political power, which he wants to do, I have to believe that, then he's going to have to put some of this money to restoring the economy so that the Iranian people will reelect him. That's not to say some of it won't go off to nefarious purposes. It probably will. But there again, we need this growing closer relationship, I think, to eventually begin to deal positively with these other issues.
Okay, let's get back to the phones. Catherine, thank you for holding. You're on with Colonel Wilkerson. Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to address the lobbying situation here. Iranian Muslim Association of North America and the Iranian American Political Action Committee, which are both lobbyist groups in the United States who have backed monetarily many senators, mostly Democrats, but some Republicans, like Senator Markey, Senator Franken, Senator Shaheen, Senator Gillibrand, and of course also Joe Biden and John Kerry. And all of these people, funnily enough, after they've received the money from the Iranian lobbyists, support this nuclear deal. And I wanted your comments on that. Also on the fact that there are 4 Americans that are behind bars in prison in Iran, and that wasn't even really addressed. And it would have been nice to have them released as a good faith effort at least, but America didn't even address that.
Okay.
Can you talk about that?
Let's get his answer. Thank you for your call, Catherine. Go ahead, Colonel.
Sure. Well, there are lobbyists here, and this really is reprehensible in my mind. There are lobbyists here in Washington who are working with the money of the MEK, the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, one of the most bloodiest terrorist groups in the world. But we've decided, the right wing in this country has decided to support the MEK because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we're supporting this bloodthirsty, brutal terrorist organization and letting them lobby on Capitol Hill against the agreement. So
Are you still there, Colonel Wilkerson? Looks like we've lost connection.
Oh, sorry about that.
We'll go to a quick commercial break. It looks like it's time anyway. I'll give him a call back.
Yeah, we'll be right back. Stay with us. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, all of a sudden, boom. I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but we'll try to get him back here in just a moment, and we'll be right back after this quick timeout. Hey, we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. We were able to reestablish communications with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. Colonel Wilkerson, before we get to Dave's call, I asked you a question during one of our breaks about how does the average lunchbox carrying American who just kind of listens to the news with the top of his mind and doesn't really pay a great deal of attention. All we ever hear about Iran is how hateful the regime is. We hate Israel. We hate America. Death to America. Death to Israel. Death, 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 death. All we ever hear is this nonstop drumbeat of doom. And so naturally, the first thing we do is, well, we don't want to give them anything. So how do you get beyond that when you're trying to convince people that this is going to be a good deal for everyone?
There are a lot of reasons that kind of rhetoric is hurled around in Tehran. One is that it's sort of a cultural thing with Persians, and by that I mean rhetoric becomes the way they deal with issues rather than action. Some could argue that that's become the way we deal with issues too, especially under President Obama. Rhetoric and no action. But rhetoric is a big thing. It's the same, and I'm not trying to stereotype here. It's roughly the same, though, in the Arab world. Words are hurled around at one another that are just vicious, profane, obscene, and terrible. And then people sit down, have a cup of tea, and deal with each other. So it's cultural in one sense, and in another sense, it's very political. And in that sense, it's understandable, even with my Western mores and customs. They have to maintain the vibrant right wing in Iran. The people in the Al-Quds force, the people in the Bashari, the people in the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, who constitute their sort of armed militia. They have to keep them revved up all the time. They do that with Islam, of course, but they also do it with rhetoric against the great Satan, the United States of America. And it's political. It's the way they maintain their power with that extreme right wing. It's the same reason Governor Huckabee, who otherwise knows better, and I find it reprehensible he did it, says that Obama has taken the Jews to the door of the ovens again. This is kind of rhetoric that is utterly reprehensible, and yet it's understandable from a political point of view. Both people, both groups are trying to get their right wing all ginned up and for them.
Colonel Wilkerson, I do feel that the tenor out of Iran is a little different than other areas of the world. And the thing that makes it different in character is the fact that they do more than talk. They invest in terrorist activities. They blow up buses. They attack people. It's more than just sitting down after a heated discussion with a cup of tea and pretending that it was all talk.
Well, there's no question about that. But also, listen, I'm a military man. I deal with the world as it is. I deal with power as it is. And if I stand as a military man on the other side of the street and I say, I'm in the other guy's shoes right now, I'm looking at a power that has more than 10,000 nuclear weapons. I'm looking at a power that spends $600 billion every year on its military. I spend 15. I'm looking at a power that has invaded a country next door to me and killed 300,000 people. I'm looking at a power that has said it is going to bomb me back to rubble. I'm looking at a power that can do all of these things. I'm looking at a power that can sanction my banks so I can't even cash a check. What do I do to fight back at that power? I turn to terrorism. I'm not trying to excuse that. What I'm trying to do is what I did as a military strategist for 31 years. Put myself in the other guy's shoes and see why he's doing what he's doing. The best way to stop him from doing what he's doing is to stop confronting him with the kinds of activities that he thinks make him have to do it.
Okay, let's get back to the phones. Folks have been waiting very patiently to visit with you. Dave, you're on with Colonel Wilkerson. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, about rhetoric. I've been listening to the rhetoric in this country, and it's a distinct possibility to me that we will bomb Iran, excuse me. But my question to you is there any plans or understanding of what Iran would do in response to this? Would they just sit back and let us bomb them and do nothing in response? Or is that being discussed?
Okay, thanks, Dave.
We've had a number of war games in the military, one conducted on the outside, that is to say by former military officers in conjunction with civilians, that the military didn't want to publicize too much because it didn't turn out too well for us. What I wrote about in my U.S. News and World Report article, for example, is that I do not believe the Iranians would fight us were we to take them on militarily the way we think they would fight us, the way we thought Vietnam would fight us, North Vietnam, the way we thought Iraq would fight us, and so forth. I think it would be asymmetric warfare. In essence, if we put boots on the ground in Iran, we'd have 50 million enemies, and those enemies would be intent on killing us any way they possibly could for as long as we remained on the ground there. Bombing them is another matter altogether. The three military analyses that I participated in and that I looked at closely, the bottom line was we bomb them, Israel bombs them, we bomb them together, and that's about all we could count on is Israel. And what Iran does is they just don't react hardly at all. They just go underground with their nuclear facilities. They beaver away, as the North Koreans did for 5-6 years, and they produce a nuclear weapon, and they dare us to do it again. So that people who say, well, we'd use the mow the grass strategy, we go out back and bomb them every 3 to 4 years or whatever, that's ridiculous, because once they've gone deep underground in the Zagros Mountains, for example, as the North Koreans did, you can bomb them all day long. It's not going to do anything to them except maybe rattle their molars. So military action is, while it could be carried out, it really is not a good course of action. Now that obviates the fact that we would use the full panoply of our military. If we wanted to use nuclear weapons, if we wanted to invade with 1 million men and women, and so forth and so on, and utterly destroy that society, that 5,000-year-old society. If we wanted to do that, and we'd probably have to kill the majority of them in order to do that, as we did, for example, in Japan, as we did, for example, in Germany in World War II, then we could probably reasonably expect some success. But do we want to do that?
It would take a total effort, and I don't think America has it in it. No. Hey, you know what, Colonel? I'm sorry, we have a 1-minute break before and we have two other folks who want to bet. John also has a point.
Well, I want to make a comment. Our internet is down. I apologize if you're putting your comments on Facebook. I can't read them because the internet is out.
Okay, so we'll be right back after this 1-minute timeout. And we're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson joining us now. John, did you want to ask your question real quick?
It's not a question. He asked for a third way. Right. I'm not a proponent of war. I'm not a proponent of just scrapping the deal. I am a proponent of renegotiating the deal. I think that there are dangerous elements in this deal that threaten the region and that threaten the United States, including some of the stuff that was added after the framework was released, like the small arms in Iran, a lot of the financial issues that came out afterwards. These things appear to have been put into the place through Russia. And although it is going to be hard to negotiate with Iran, and I agree with Colonel Wilkerson on that, it seems like we do have a lot more leverage with Germany and France and England and Russia and China, the other P5 countries. And I think that we should use that. And I would like to hear your response to that, Colonel Wilkerson. Why can't we renegotiate some of the more, I think, atrocious elements of this deal?
I might agree with you that I would like to go back and renegotiate one or two aspects of it, but I don't think that's a possibility. The countries that were involved in this deal have let us know that it's not a possibility.
And how do we know that's not the same bizarrism that Iran has been pulling?
Well, let me give you a thumbnail sketch. Right now, the Chinese and in essence their central bank governor, who is a brilliant man, are doing everything they possibly can to ensure the future of the renminbi as against the future of the dollar. What that means is that the renminbi or some other form of special drawing rights, for example, at the IMF or whatever we might want to call it in the future, is eventually going to replace the dollar as the world's transactional and reserve currency. We need to be very careful about how this process unfolds. For example, we made a grievous mistake in objecting to the bank that the Chinese wanted to form, Development Bank in East Asia. We should have been at the front door saying we want to be a member, because all of this is a move by Beijing, in part in partnership with Moscow for ulterior motives, in order to replace the dollar so we lose some of our power. The last thing in the world we need to be doing is increasing the desire of our principal allies in the world, like Britain, Germany, France, and others, Japan, to join this crowd, because they grow tired of our using sanctions not only to damage pinpointedly an enemy like Iran, but also, if they don't go along with it, them. This is becoming a real problem in the world, and the United States' financial and economic power, I'm sorry, Americans need to begin to recognize this, is not what it was. It's becoming increasingly embattled because of our desire to do things like make international sanctions impact third, fourth, and fifth parties. These people are not going to sign up to this. We are going to be the isolated party financially, economically, and otherwise. And frankly, we do not have the financial and economic power left to do it all by ourselves. And so we're going to increasingly need these other people to help us do these sorts of things in the world when the situation does get serious. And we don't need to be alienating them when we have a perfectly decent agreement to start with.
Okay, let's try to get at least one more call in. Alan, you're on with Colonel Wilkerson. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. I guess my objection to this whole thing is the process. To me, this is a treaty. If you read the Constitution, this is a treaty. And under the Constitution, it must be ratified by the Senate. But this whole thing has been changed. So this is going to go through one way or the other. If it was a treaty, it would take 2/3 of the Senate to prevent this thing from being approved. But now it's going to take 2/3 of Congress to stop it. So I don't like the process. I see our Constitution being hurt, and it's being hurt by this treaty. That's my comment.
Okay, thanks so much, Alan. We have a minute and a half, Colonel, so please go ahead.
Well, first of all, more agreements done by the executive branch of government since World War II in particular, but over our history as a nation in general, have been effective than treaties. And it is a very sound argument for the President in this particular instance to argue for this being an executive agreement, which matches many more than it does treaties, than it is to push it as a treaty. I do take the point, though, and I would say this. I don't think, even if we get, in the first case, a vote of favor from the Congress, but what we're most likely to get is a vote of disfavor, and then that's vetoed, and then the veto is sustained, is a very good way to go into this agreement. So I am very concerned, and my concern emanates from the same point the questioner just indicated himself, that we have the kind of support for this agreement that's necessary to see it go forward and be a success. I sat in the State Department and watched the United States Congress undermine the agreement with North Korea. I watched the United States Congress not provide the heavy fuel oil in the quantities it had been specified they would, and even more importantly, not provide the money to the Korean Energy Development Organization, along with the Europeans, to build the light water reactors that we promised North Korea to keep them from making the nuclear fissile material in their Yongbyon reactor.
Colonel, I am so sorry. We are almost completely out of time. Is there a website where we can find out more of what you're up to with these negotiations and with your thoughts?
No, I've just Google me.
You can read his most recent piece on our website, our Facebook page.
You bet.
It's in U.S. News and World Report.
Excellent. Colonel Wilkerson, we appreciate, first of all, your service to our country, and we thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me, and I wish you some smoke-free days.
Yeah, would be nice. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Bye-bye. That's going to do it tomorrow, the Montana World Affairs Council on the radio. So remember, unhealthy air quality, be careful.